Have you ever wondered what happens beneath your thoughts, beneath even the voice in your head that wonders such things? Tonight, we explore the silent space behind the mind, where perception arises before it has a name, and presence exists without needing attention. If you've been feeling mentally overstimulated, uncertain, or simply tired of being in your head, this story is a gentle invitation back into something quieter and wiser. Let's take a deep breath together, wherever you are in the world. Whatever time it is, this moment is yours. Just notice the air entering your lungs. Notice your weight against the surface beneath you. Let the effort of the day melt out of your shoulders. There is nothing to figure out here, only something to remember. Tonight, we'll walk softly through paradoxes, quantum echoes, and ancient silence. This isn't a lesson. It's a remembering. So make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you like. And if you find yourself drifting off, that's perfectly okay. Subscribe if you enjoy these quiet stories, and feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is others may be listening right alongside you, even now. Let's begin with a simple question. What lives beneath your thinking? There's a quiet intelligence beneath all thought, a presence that does not speak in words, does not move in logic, and yet seems to know far more than thinking ever could. The strange thing is, the more we try to find it, the further it recedes. Like trying to grab still water with your fingers, it slips through every mental attempt to hold it. But sometimes, when you're not trying at all, when you're staring out a window or letting warm water run over your shoulders in the shower, it's there. Not as a voice, not even as a feeling, but as something more fundamental. A noticing. A soft awareness that says, I've always been here. Not dramatic, not loud. Just quietly, consistently awake. And once you start to sense it, the world never feels quite the same again. Most people assume that thinking is the highest form of knowing. We revere analysis, strategy, mental prowess. We build identities out of opinions, goals, and internal monologues. But have you ever watched a hawk glide across the sky, or a child giggle without explanation, and wondered, who is more awake here? There is something undeniable in that wordless presence, a kind of purity that thinking only seems to dilute. It's as if thought adds texture to reality, but also takes something away. Every time we describe a moment, we cut it into pieces. Every label gives a little distance. A flower is no longer just color and scent, it's a rose. A breath becomes deep, shallow, anxious, controlled. And in naming it, we stop fully being with it. It's a strange thing. The more you think about your experience, the less you're actually having it. The mind is always a few seconds late, narrating what has already passed. Like a sportscaster announcing a game that just ended. It's never quite now. And yet we rely on it so heavily that we forget there's any other way to know. But beneath that narration, before the mind assigns meaning, there is something that feels more true. It's not a fact. It's not even a belief. It's a kind of felt knowing, a resonance that says, this is real, even if it can't be proven. Try it now. Without using words, sense the space in the room around you, not the objects, not the sounds, just the space itself. There's no need to describe it. Just feel what it's like to be here, where you are, without adding a story to it. That right, there is the place thought can't reach. Not because it's too complex, but because it's too simple. Thought needs edges to grip, contrast, to compare, but pure presence doesn't offer that. It doesn't speak. It doesn't explain. It just is. And here's the paradox. The moment you say, I'm being present, you've already moved out of presence and into commentary. You've turned the moment into a mental concept. You're not with the breath, you're thinking about the breath. You're not in the now, you're labeling it. This loop can be frustrating for people on spiritual paths. They want to be mindful, But the act of trying to be mindful becomes just another thought. And yet, the answer is simpler than it seems. Presence isn't something you create. It's something you uncover. It's already there, always has been quietly shining beneath the noise. Neuroscience has tried to map this. It tells us that our brains operate with a slight delay. What we call now is actually a stitched-together illusion, assembled milliseconds after events occur. You hear a sound, see a flash of light, and your brain syncs them as one moment, even though they arrived at different times. You're watching a delayed broadcast of reality, but it's seamless enough that you don't notice. This makes the idea of living in the moment even stranger. If your brain is always behind, can you ever truly catch the now? Or are you always experiencing echoes? But perhaps the problem isn't with timing. Perhaps the problem is with seeking. Presence is not a thing to catch. It's what's here when you stop chasing. It's not the echo, it's the silence before. Sound. You don't arrive at it, you return to it. And ironically, it's most available when you're not looking. That's why your most profound realizations often arrive when you've stopped trying. In the bath, on a walk, during a mundane chore. Your attention softens, and suddenly something deeper emerges. Not from thought, but from the space beneath it. This is why ancient traditions speak of the void not as emptiness, but as fullness without form. In Taoism, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. In Zen, the sound of one hand clapping isn't meant to be answered. It's meant to short-circuit the mind. In these spaces, logic fails on purpose. Because logic cannot hold the whole. It can divide, analyze, understand parts, but it cannot become the ocean. It can only describe waves. And somewhere deep inside, you already know this. You've felt moments where time slowed, thought paused, and something more real peeked through. Maybe during heartbreak. Maybe during awe. Maybe when looking at the stars and realizing your thoughts seemed laughably small. There's a curious thing about those moments. They don't come with instruction. They don't tell you what to do, but they change you. Something in you loosens, softens. You start listening differently. You stop needing so many answers. You stop needing to be right. And slowly, your attention begins to shift from the content of thought to the space around it. From the noise to the silence. From the commentary to the canvas dot. This is the beginning of a different kind of intelligence. One that doesn't argue, doesn't panic, doesn't shout over itself. It just waits, watches, listens, not with ears, not with effort, but with presence. This intelligence doesn't think less, it thinks differently. Or maybe it doesn't think at all. Maybe it just knows. Not in words, but in direct, cellular certainty. Like the way birds navigate without maps. Or how children understand joy without needing a definition. We're not trained to trust this kind of knowing. It doesn't fit into boxes. You can't justify it in meetings or explain it in essays. It's quiet. It's internal. It's patient. And in a culture addicted to noise, it can seem like nothing at all, but it's not nothing. It's the ground beneath the noise. It's the silence into which thought dissolves when it's no longer needed. And the longer you sit with it, and more clearly you sense its shape, not as a thing, but as the space that allows all things to be dot, it can be tempting to chase this stillness, to try and hold on to it. But that's like trying to keep a breeze. In a box, the very act of grasping collapses the experience. That's why the ancient masters spoke in paradoxes. The way to do is to be, to gain everything, let go of everything. These aren't riddles, they're reflections of a reality that can't be approached head-on. You have to sidestep the mind. You have to look not with the eyes of thought, but with the eyes of presence. The eyes that don't judge, that don't seek, that simply see dot, and as you begin to live from this seeing, life itself begins to feel different. not always easier, but more spacious. You stop reacting to every thought like it's a command. You stop believing every inner voice like it's gospel. You begin to notice the difference between a thought and the one who is aware of thinking. And that difference is everything. That's the shift. The moment you stop being the voice and start being the space in which the voice appears. This is not about detachment. It's not about floating above life or bypassing emotion. It's about intimacy. Deeper intimacy than the mind can offer. When you are no longer tangled in thought, you can actually feel more pain. Yes, but also more wonder. You see things more clearly. You hear things more fully. You're not numbing out. You're waking up, not to a new belief, but to what's been true all along. Something quietly shifts when you begin to sense the difference between the thinker and the field in which thinking happens. You don't stop thinking. You just no longer believe every thought has authority. It's like realizing the narrator in your mind isn't always reporting the truth. It's often guessing, replaying, worrying, or defending. But you are not that voice. You are the one hearing it. And the moment that realization lands, there's a soft cracking open, not a loud breakthrough, just a subtle spaciousness, as if the mind itself has taken a breath and realized it doesn't need to hold everything. That spaciousness is awareness itself. It doesn't argue with thoughts. It simply allows them to appear and disappear like clouds drifting across a vast sky that never changes. And once you begin to feel that sky-like quality within you, a strange calm arrives, not the calm of empty stillness, but of vast perspective. Suddenly, a racing mind no longer feels like an emergency. A sad thought doesn't require immediate escape. A moment of confusion becomes just another passing ripple. And because you're not grasping at each wave, you begin to notice the ocean. Not metaphorically, actually, the ocean of consciousness, always present, always steady, beneath the surface agitation of mind. You can't describe it, but you can rest in it. You don't find it with logic. You relax into it when logic gets tired. This is not an act of doing. It's the dissolving of effort. You don't need to chase peace. Peace is what remains when chasing falls away. But we've been taught the opposite. That stillness is a reward for control. That clarity is a product of problem solving. That presence must be achieved by perfecting attention. But what if all of that is just more noise? More subtle resistance to what already is? What if the answer isn't effort, but intimacy? Not with thought, but with the awareness before thought arises. Consider this. Every time you try to be present, you place yourself outside the present. You turn now into an object, a goal, something to be reached. But presence isn't a destination. It's what remains when there's nowhere else to go. It's the default state of consciousness when the compulsion to narrate falls silent. That's why it often arrives when you're tired or in awe or overwhelmed when the mind lets go, because it can no longer hold on. And this surrender reveals something most of us overlook. The mind is not the master. It's a servant. A brilliant one, yes, but not the source of who you are. When it steps back, something deeper steps forward. A kind of knowing that doesn't depend on reason. A trust that isn't rooted in evidence. You've felt it before. In moments where you said yes without understanding why. In times when you knew something would happen before it did. In choices that made no sense on paper, but turned out to be exactly right. This isn't mystical. It's innate. It's what remains when the noise of fear and control gets quiet enough for truth to whisper. And when you begin to live from that whisper, your relationship to thinking transforms. You stop trying to silence thoughts. You start witnessing them. Like watching traffic from the sidewalk instead of standing in the road. Thoughts come, thoughts go, but you no longer chase each one like it holds the key to peace. You begin to sense the space between them, And that space is alive. Not empty. Not void. Alive. It hums with possibility. It is the birthplace of insight, intuition, and creativity. This space is where your deepest intelligence lies, not in the noise of figuring out, but in the silence of knowing. It's where artists find inspiration, not by thinking harder, but by letting go. It's why your best ideas arrive when you're doing something completely unrelated: washing dishes, walking a dog, lying in bed. The mind relaxes its grip, and suddenly, something deeper delivers clarity. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped forcing. In this state, action flows differently. You don't decide what to do in the usual way. There's no weighing, comparing, calculating. There's just movement, seamless, natural, as if life is acting through you. And it is, because in truth, it always has been. You are not the doer. You are the field in which doing happens. You are not the stream. You are the riverbed. And when you remember that, striving dissolves. There's nothing to achieve, only something to express. But this isn't about passivity. It's not about sitting on a mountaintop waiting for the universe to move you. It's about listening differently, acting from clarity rather than fear, letting the inner noise settle before reaching for answers. When you act from this space, your actions are cleaner. There's less entanglement, less reactivity. You're not trying to prove, perform, or control. You're just doing what's needed from a place that feels deeply whole. This wholeness is not perfection. It doesn't mean you never feel pain or doubt. It means you stop identifying with every fluctuation. A storm can pass through the sky, but it doesn't shake the sky itself. In the same way, emotions can swirl, thoughts can clash, and yet awareness remains untouched. That doesn't make you detached. It makes you free. Free to feel without drowning. Free to respond without collapsing. Free to live without building an identity out of each passing wave. And here's the curious part. This freedom often looks ordinary. You still wake up, brush your teeth, pay bills. But something is different. You're not carrying the weight of the mind like before. You're not constantly chasing peace because peace is where you're starting from. You're not trying to be someone. You're remembering that you already are. And that changes everything. This remembering isn't a one-time event. It's a rhythm, a return. You forget, and then you remember. You get caught, and then you notice. There's no shame in that. Noticing is the practice. Noticing is the doorway back. And every time you return, the path gets a little clearer. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to it has softened. The storm still rages, but you're no longer lost in the wind. This is the quiet intelligence beneath all thought. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It just waits until you're quiet enough to feel it. And when you do, something in you sighs with recognition. There you are. Not as a new self, but as the self that's always been here beneath the stories, beneath the striving, beneath the mind's endless commentary. You may still go through days where thoughts feel heavy, where presence feels distant. That's okay. Awareness doesn't disappear. It just waits behind the curtain. And the moment you stop trying to pull it open, the light seeps through. Not as a flash of enlightenment, but as a subtle shift. A little more spaciousness, a little less reactivity, a bit more trust in something you can't define, but no longer need to. You begin to recognize that you don't need to understand everything to rest in it. That truth doesn't require thought to be real. That the deepest parts of you do not speak, they resonate. Like the way music moves you without explanation. Like the way love doesn't need to be earned to be felt. Like the way you know you're alive, even when you have no words for why. This is the intelligence the mind can't grasp, but always lives within. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And the more you listen, the clearer it becomes, not as a thought, but as a knowing that you've never actually been lost. You've only been busy dot, and now perhaps you are ready to pause, not to figure it all out, but to let go of needing to. And in that pause, in that letting go, something ancient and immediate begins to stir. Not as a concept, not as a voice, but as the quiet truth that has always been here. Beneath it all, there comes a moment. In this remembering, when you stop needing presence to feel like anything at all, you stop measuring it by sensation, clarity, or peace. You begin to recognize that even the dullness, the restlessness, the boredom, all of it is taking place inside awareness. Even when the mind feels foggy, awareness is clear. Even when the heart feels tight, awareness is open. It's not something that appears and disappears, depending on your state. It's the space in which every state occurs. That realization doesn't always bring bliss. Often, it brings quiet, not dramatic stillness, but a subtle dropping away of tension. The kind you don't notice until it's gone. The way a humming fridge suddenly clicks off and the silence feels louder than the noise ever did. This quiet is not the absence of life. It's the noticing of life without the filter of reaction. You still feel pain, but you don't weave it into a story about yourself. You still get angry, but you're no longer the character caught in the scene. You become the screen on which all scenes are projected. The movie keeps playing, but you are no longer inside it. And strangely, this doesn't make you distant. It makes you more compassionate. Because you're no longer defending a role, you can feel into the whole play. You don't need anyone to change for you to be at peace. You just notice where peace is already waiting underneath the desire for change. Even spiritual striving begins to soften. You stop asking how to get there. You start realizing there is no there, apart from the here that's already held in quiet attention. All techniques, all paths, all practices, they may point, but they are not the presence itself. At some point, the finger must lower so you can see the moon without needing to name it. In that nameless space, you remember what the mystics tried to translate with trembling tongues, that awakening is not a state of perfection. It's the state in which perfection and imperfection no longer matter. It's not about being beyond thought. It's about no longer being trapped inside it. Thought can still visit. It just doesn't get to rearrange the furniture. Emotion can still knock, but it's no longer a flood that defines you. Everything that once ruled you becomes a guest. Even the you that wanted to wake up becomes just another character appearing in the field. And when that old seeker self dissolves, there's no longer anyone asking how to be free. There's just freedom itself without an owner. That's the strangest part of all awakening. Doesn't feel personal. It doesn't enhance your identity. It dissolves the need for one dot, and yet daily life continues. You still brush your teeth. You still buy groceries. But the context has shifted. You're not trying to find meaning in every passing mood. You're not trying to decode the purpose of every life event. You don't need every part of your day to be profound. You're okay with the ordinariness of it all, because something in you knows, deeply and quietly, that nothing needs to be different. For this moment to be enough, you begin to walk slower, listen longer, speak less. Not because you're trying to be mindful, but because there's nothing pushing anymore. The inner pressure has uncoiled, and with its release comes a gentler kind of presence. A presence that includes everything, even noise, even confusion, even forgetting dot. This is what most seekers miss. That the awakened state is not a place you live in forever. It's the recognition that every state belongs, even the ones where you feel far away from truth, even the ones where the mind races and the body tenses. The field includes it all, and you are not separate from the field. You are not inside awareness. Awareness is inside you, or perhaps more accurately, as you. there's no boundary. There never was. It only felt that way when you thought thoughts were borders. But now the borders are dissolving, and something tender begins to appear. A kind of inner bowing to what is. Not because you've given up, but because you've given over. Given over the need to fix, to fight, to frame everything as good or bad. You begin to see with the eyes of the field itself, eyes that do not judge, eyes that do not search, eyes that simply receive. And when life is received without conditions, it offers gifts you never knew you were missing. The way light dances on dust particles, the quiet hum of your refrigerator, the strange peace in folding laundry. You start to feel the sacred in the utterly mundane, not because the moment has changed, but because you have. You've stopped demanding revelation. And in doing so, everything reveals itself. The mind, of course, doesn't vanish. It still speaks, still comments, still offers opinions. But now you hear it the way you hear a radio in another room present, but not commanding your full attention. It becomes background music to the foreground of presence. You may still forget, still get pulled in, but you come back faster. You return with less drama. And in that return, you deepen your relationship with the silence beneath all sound. Eventually, even the desire for stillness fades. Not because you no longer value it, but because you realize it's always here. It doesn't need to be conjured or protected. It's not a fragile state to maintain. It's the default reality beneath all doing. You could be in traffic, mid-argument, or cleaning a mess, and still, it waits quietly beneath the surface, not as a reward. As a reminder, the reminder whispers through strange timings. A sudden wave of peace in the middle of tears. A moment of laughter in the middle of despair. A deep breath that seems to breathe you. These aren't accidents. They are breadcrumbs, glimpses of the truth beneath the turbulence. And the more you follow them, the less you need to analyze them. You don't need to prove what you're experiencing. You just need to feel it. Let it inform you. Let it rewire you. And as it rewires you, something remarkable happens. You begin to live differently, not by trying to improve, but by relaxing into alignment. Choices arise not from fear or strategy, but from a natural clarity that doesn't rush. Relationships become less about proving your worth and more about seeing through the illusion of separation. You speak less to be understood and more to share silence and words. You love, not as an act of effort, but as a spontaneous expression of being God. And when pain visits, as it always will, you welcome it differently. Not to indulge it or push it away, but to feel it without making it your identity. Suffering no longer means something is wrong. It just means something is being touched. Something is surfacing. And now you have the space to hold it, the quiet. Intelligence beneath thought doesn't try to fix pain. It surrounds it, holds it like a bowl holds water unshaken, still, whole. And in that holding, the pain softens. Not because it's solved, but because it's no longer resisted. This is the alchemy of presence. It transforms not by doing, but by being. And in that being, everything finds its place. Even words begin to feel like echoes of a deeper language. A language without form. A vibration that speaks in presence alone. You feel it in the pause between sentences. In the breath that precedes a smile. In the way your chest loosens without reason. That's the language of the field. And once you learn to listen, you never stop hearing it. You don't need to leave your life to dwell in this awareness. You don't need to retreat or isolate. You simply include everything. Include the noise. Include the distraction. Include the forgetting. The practice is not to escape, but to remember in the middle of the forgetting. And every time you remember, you leave a little trace of clarity behind. A subtle trail that others can sense. Not in your words, but in your presence. you become less. Of a person trying to wake up and more, like a field through which awakening flows. It's not an arrival. It's an ongoing softening, a loosening of grip, a letting in. And as this continues, one day you realize something quietly profound. You no longer need life to be a certain way in order to feel okay. You no longer need to fix the world in order to rest within it. You are not numb. You are deeply attuned. And that attunement makes even silence feel full. You stop looking for enlightenment like a finish line. You stop waiting for the mind to. Stop speaking. You just sit alive in the now without needing it to be different. And in that sitting, something eternal begins to glow. Not as an idea, not as a goal, but as the truth of what you've always been. There comes a strange peace when you realize that forgetting is part of the path. That the very act of wandering away from presence is itself a gesture of presence trying to find its way back through. Experience, like waves lapping away from shore, only to return. You may think you've lost awareness when you get pulled into worry, story, identity, but what if the very noticing of your distraction is itself a form of remembering? What if forgetting is not failure, but invitation? The field of awareness never shuns the wave for crashing. It only waits for the return. And in this waiting, in this silent welcome, a deeper intelligence breathes without name. You begin to notice something subtle. Awareness doesn't rush. It doesn't panic when you're caught in thought. It doesn't abandon you when you numb out. It doesn't clench when you cry. It simply holds. It witnesses. Even when you forget who you are, awareness doesn't. It watches your forgetting without judgment. Like a parent sitting quietly on the porch, knowing the child will come home when the running is done. This gentle gaze is not passive. It's powerful because it never resists. It doesn't try to change what's happening. And in doing nothing, it allows everything to unfold with dignity. This is where a new kind of trust is born, not in the events of life, not in outcomes or circumstances, but in the awareness that receives them all. You stop needing every part of your life to make sense. You stop needing clarity to feel safe. You rest inside the mystery because the mystery is no longer frightening. It is home, and the mind, long obsessed with fixing and figuring out, softens its grip, not because it has been silenced, but because it has been seen for what it is, a servant, not a self. There is a quiet nobility in this shift. You may still look ordinary from the outside. You still drink coffee, answer emails, feel irritated when things go wrong. But something underneath is different. There's a deep breath beneath the shallow ones, a steadiness beneath the trembling, a gaze behind the eyes that doesn't blink with fear. And this gaze begins to see others differently, too, not as personalities to analyze or problems to solve, but as reflections of the same awareness, appearing in different shapes. Even their noise feels familiar. Even their forgetting becomes forgivable. Because you felt your own. Compassion blooms not from superiority, but from shared humanity. You no longer need people to awaken for you to love them. You love them. Because they are you, shaped by different winds, walking different stories, but made of the same awareness, wearing different masks. And in this recognition, connection loses its conditions. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to be liked. You just need to stay open, because that openness is the gift itself. This doesn't mean boundaries dissolve. Awareness is not blind. It knows when to say no. It knows when something isn't aligned. But it says no from clarity, not from contraction. It walks away without the weight of bitterness. It leaves the door open without needing to be followed. This kind of action feels clean. It has no residue. It doesn't leave you second-guessing because it arose not from fear, but from presence. And presence never betrays itself. In fact, the deeper you live from this space, the more simplicity begins to reappear. Life doesn't feel as tangled. Decisions lose their heaviness. You begin to trust the subtle movements in your own energy. A conversation feels off, you step away. A moment feels spacious, you stay. You're not looking for signs. You are the sign. And your body, once confused by mental overanalysis, begins to feel like an antenna again. You don't force it to. Feel calm. You listen for what's already calm within it. And this listening brings unexpected gifts. A gentle breath where there used to be tension. A full body exhale without knowing why. A sense of belonging that doesn't need validation. You walk through the world not as someone trying to be spiritual, but as someone remembering they never stopped being. The world doesn't need to see your awakening. It only needs to feel your presence. And even that is not a requirement. It's just what naturally spills from stillness. Eventually, even the idea of spiritual progress begins to dissolve. You stop measuring how present you are. You stop trying to stay aware. You live your life. You forget. You remember. And you love yourself through both. Awareness doesn't grade your performance. It doesn't issue gold stars for moments of clarity. It holds your sleep as gently as your waking. And when you stumble, it doesn't shout. It softly reaches. Not to lift you out, but to sit beside you until you see the light still glimmering under the weight. And there is always light, even in grief, even in rage, even in numbness, because light is not a feeling. It is the quality of awareness itself, unfazed, unburned, unshaken. You don't need to summon it. You need only remove what blocks your seeing. And most often, what blocks your seeing is the belief that something is missing, that you must change, fix, earn, or strive. But the field asks for none of that. It asks only for you to rest as what? You already are God. This is not a passive life. It is a surrendered one. You still show up, still act, still speak. But you do so from a well that doesn't run dry, because you've stopped drawing from identity and started drawing from being. Identity needs fuel. Being simply is. And the more you live from being, the less effort it takes to be yourself. Because there is no yourself to be, there is only the field expressing through you, naturally, uniquely, without needing approval. And this expression carries an unmistakable frequency. Not flashy, not loud, but unmistakable. It's the vibration of someone who is no longer trying to prove they're awake, who is no longer trying to save the world to avoid facing themselves, who has made peace with the ordinary and therefore becomes extraordinary in their presence. You meet people like this sometimes. They don't say much, but something in you relaxes around them. They don't offer solutions, but your pain feels heard in their silence. They don't preach. They are the teaching, and slowly you become one of them, not by becoming better, but by becoming less. Less defended, less performing, less controlling. And in the subtraction, presence blooms, not as a performance, but as your natural state, the one you forgot only because the noise was too loud to hear it. But now the noise softens. And what remains is what has always been unmoved, untroubled, quietly alive dot. So you keep living. You keep forgetting and remembering. But each return is easier. Each fall feels shorter. Each moment asks less of you and offers more. Because you're no longer waiting for enlightenment to change your life. You're allowing life to awaken itself through you, one breath at a time. Not as a peak experience, but as a continuous unfolding. The quiet miracle of this very now dot. And this now is not an idea, not a concept. It is the unfiltered, unlabeled, uninterpreted actuality of what's here. It doesn't need your thoughts to validate it. It doesn't require your attention to exist. But when your attention meets it without resistance, something clicks. Not loudly, softly, like a feather settling into place. And in that settling, You no longer stand on the edge of life. You become its center dot. You no longer wonder how to be present. You recognize that you are presence, noticing itself. You no longer chase peace. You realize you are what peace is made. Of dot, you no longer seek silence. You are the space in which even silence appears. And when this truth lands, even for a moment, it undoes centuries of forgetting. Not with fire, but with a whisper. You are home. You don't need to keep the stillness alive. You don't need to protect the silence like a candle from wind. Stillness doesn't burn out. It only becomes obscured by thought. Like the sun behind clouds, its warmth never leaves. It waits not with desperation, not with need, but with a timeless patience that doesn't flinch. And you begin to feel this truth not as an idea to remember, but as the atmosphere of your own being. Not something you add to yourself, but what you were made of all along. You no longer fear forgetting. You trust that even in your forgetting, something remembers you. This trust becomes your quiet center, not the kind that boasts or declares, but the kind that simply is. You stop seeking signs that you're on the right path. You stop measuring your awareness like grades on a report card. You begin to see that there is no separate path to walk, only this moment, and the quality of your presence in it. Even when distracted, even when reactive, you return. Not because you were wrong, but because you're now soft enough to notice. The mind will say, "You've fallen behind." But awareness whispers, "You've never left. You live differently from this place, not dramatically, but undeniably." The smallest actions carry clarity. The way you pause before speaking, the way you listen without needing to answer, the way you notice the space between things, the breath between words, the silence between thoughts, the stillness between steps. These spaces become your sanctuary, not as an escape, but as a reminder that you are not your motion. You are the field in which motion moves. From this field, love no longer requires effort. It simply flows. You begin to feel it everywhere, not just for people you care about, but for strangers, animals, broken objects, forgotten places. It's not sentimental. It's not poetic. It's real, practical, immediate, a spontaneous warmth that doesn't ask for a story. It just appears. And in this appearance, all separation becomes thinner. You still know the difference between me and you, but the edges blur. You stop holding your identity like a shield. You start seeing others through the eyes of the field, and these eyes are not soft because they are weak. They are soft because they have seen everything and are no longer surprised. They have watched empires rise and fall. They have seen countless thoughts parade across the mind. They have witnessed joy, grief, betrayal, bliss, and still they remain open. Not because nothing touches them, but because they are too vast to be shaken. You begin to carry these eyes, and the world responds differently. Not because it has changed, but because you are not demanding it to be otherwise. Even conflict feels different. You may still argue, still get hurt, still set boundaries, but you do so with less residue. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer trying to prove your worth through rightness. The deeper truth needs no defense. And when you no longer defend it, your very being becomes a kind of teaching without trying to teach. Your presence becomes more impactful than your words. And in moments when words do come, they come not from strategy, but from alignment. Alignment becomes your compass. You stop chasing goals that feel off in your body. You begin to honor the intelligence of discomfort, not as something to be fixed, but as something to be listened to. When an action feels out of rhythm, you pause. When a path feels hollow, you turn, not because of fear, but because you've learned to trust the quiet hum of what's real. You don't need to explain your choices. The field doesn't ask for reports. It only asks for honesty. And honesty is no longer a performance. It's an atmosphere. You're not trying to be authentic. You simply are. There's no script, no persona to uphold, just the unfolding of each moment through a self that no longer resists being seen. And even if others don't understand it, they can feel it. They may not know why they feel safe around you, why they soften, why they open, but they do. Because truth recognizes itself, even through silence, and silence becomes less rare. It starts to fill the gaps in your day, not as emptiness, but as presence. Waiting in line, you no longer reach for your phone. Sitting at a red light, you feel the breath instead of the clock. Even loneliness feels different, not as lack, but as a kind of sacred solitude. A time when the self that usually performs has gone quiet, and what remains is something realer than any identity, something too wide to name. You realize you don't need to escape yourself. You need only meet yourself without commentary. The moment you stop narrating your experience opens, not wider, just truer. A tree becomes a tree again, not a concept, not a symbol, not a metaphor, just leaves moving in wind, and it's enough. More than enough, because you're finally here, not as an observer, as the field in which observation and object dissolve. Words begin to lose their grip. You still use them, but they no longer bind. You say what needs saying, but you no longer feel compelled to explain the unexplainable. Mystery stops feeling like a problem. It becomes your companion, your home, your breath. And from that place, new insight arises, not through thinking, but through listening, deep listening, not to sound, but to the space from which sound comes. Even your emotions begin to change texture. Sadness feels less sharp. Anger feels less dangerous. Joy feels less fragile, because you no longer use them to define who you are. You feel them fully and let them go, not as an act of control, but because there's nothing left to hold. You are no longer a container of experience. You are the infinite space in which experience dances. And this dancing doesn't need choreography. It doesn't need to make sense. It only needs to move. So you let it move. You let life move through you, as you, without resistance. And each time you do, you remember, not with your mind, but with your whole being, that you were never meant to control this dance. You were meant to become it. Even dreams shift. They feel lighter, less like messages and more like echoes. Echoes of the infinite working through the finite. And you no longer wake up searching for their meaning. You simply feel into the residue, the energy, the hum. And that hum reminds you that even sleep is not separate from awareness. Even the deepest slumber is held within the field. And when you sit quietly, with no goal, no technique, no posture to maintain, something subtle rises, a familiarity, a softness, as if the very space around you is recognizing itself through your stillness, not as watcher and watched, but as one being, remembering its wholeness through the illusion of form. And you smile, not because you figured anything out, but because you stopped needing to. The mystery is enough. The breath is enough. The hum of existence is enough. Even your sense of time changes. You stop measuring your life in chapters and start feeling it in pulses. There is no before, no after, only the rhythmic unfolding of now. And this now is not stagnant. It breathes, it sings, it whispers, it evolves, but it never leaves. And from here, you see that nothing was ever separate. Thought and silence, form and formlessness, seeking and stillness, all part of the same dance, all ripples in the same ocean. And that ocean is you, not the idea of you, not the role or name, but the open awareness in which all roles appear and dissolve like waves returning to sea. And in that sea, there is no effort to float. You are carried, always were. Even when it felt like drowning. Even then, the ocean held you. It holds you still. You might think this journey ends in silence, but it doesn't. It begins there. Not the silence of soundlessness, but the silence beneath sound. The silence you carry with you, even in crowds, even during conversation, even in the heat of emotion. It is not the absence of thought. It is the space in which thought arises, dances, dissolves. And now, you know it not just as a concept, but as a home, not far away, not hidden, but always quietly here. You've walked through loops of memory, paradoxes of seeking, echoes of insight, and the soft unraveling of identity. And what's left is not a self that has conquered the mind. What's left is what's always been presence. Not the version you perform, the version you stop pretending to be when you're finally alone. The part of you that watches even your highest understanding without attachment. The breath that watches breath. The light behind every thought, waiting without agenda. This presence is not something you protect. It's something that protects you, not like a shield, but like an atmosphere. It cushions your reactivity. It slows the grasping. It reminds you again and again that no thought is ever the whole of you. That no mood defines you. That no forgetting erases the one who remembers. You don't have to try to be present. You only have to notice when you're not, and then gently come back. And if even that feels too hard, know that the coming back happens on its own. You can rest inside the forgetting too. The field is never gone. It simply waits, and you begin to move through the world differently. Not perfectly, but gently. You feel yourself soften around people who used to activate you. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to be right. You just breathe. You feel the current of reactivity start to rise, and you let it move through without clutching it. The silence inside you listens, not because it wants to respond, but because it knows it doesn't need to. This kind of listening changes everything. It turns conversations into communion. It turns misunderstandings into mirrors. It turns even pain into something sacred, not because it disappears, but because it's finally seen. And you realize that this seeing is the most healing thing in the world. Not fixing, not solving, not advising, just seeing yourself, others, life, without the constant filter of resistance. And in that seeing, the struggle begins to fade. Not because life becomes easier, but because it no longer needs to be difficult in order to teach you. You are no longer learning through chaos. You are learning through awareness itself. And in that awareness, new intelligence emerges. One that doesn't operate from plans or scripts. It rises in real time, shaped by the clarity of now. You begin to trust this intelligence more than your old strategies. You start to feel the rhythm of your own being. You say no when it contracts. You say yes when it expands. You live, not from obligation, but from alignment. And still, you forget. Still, you fall into the noise. But now, even that feels different. You don't spiral so far. You don't stay lost so long. And when you return, there's less shame, less judgment. Just a quiet, yes, I wandered again, and here I am. And the here you return to feels more spacious than ever. Because you are no longer returning to an idea of peace. You are returning to the awareness that holds all ideas. Even the concept of awakening fades. It stops feeling like something to chase. It becomes something you laugh with, smile at, nod toward. It's not an event. It's a remembering. And that remembering doesn't need to last forever to be real. A single moment of real presence can shift a lifetime of resistance. And even if it fades again, the seed remains, the trace, the resonance. That's all you ever needed. So now you live, simply, with your hands in the soil of this human life, with dishes to wash, with people to disappoint and forgive, with hearts to hold, with breath to feel, and in the middle of it all, you rest, not by escaping, but by being so deeply here that even chaos feels like a passing weather pattern, and you stop hoping for perfect days. You start opening to real ones, and in real days, there is silence, there is thought, there is sleep, there is laughter, there is boredom, there is beauty. There is you not as a name, not as a story, but as the field in which all of this passes like wind through grass. Nothing to hold, nothing to become, only something to witness with love. You don't have to hold on to anything from this story. Not the insights, not the stillness, not even the remembering. Because what is real never leaves you. It doesn't ask to be remembered. It simply waits to be noticed again. So if you find yourself drifting back into noise, that's okay. The quiet will still be here, beneath the words, beneath the roles, beneath the thoughts about who you should be. And maybe the next time you pause, even for a breath, you'll feel it, that soft presence beneath all striving, that vast awareness holding even your forgetting without judgment. Let this be enough. Let the simplicity of being be enough. You are not the noise in your mind. You are the space that allows it. And you don't have to become that space. You only have to stop pretending you aren't it. If this story helped you return to that truth, even for a moment, and we've met in the most meaningful way, subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. And remember, other stories are also waiting for you, patiently, like the silence that never left.